Members of this prestigious body, the United States Senate, convene here in the spirit of one of the 7 Noahide laws, which was set forth by you as an eternal universal code of ethics for all mankind.
Are non-Jews obligated to keep the 7 Noahide laws?
Well, every person in the world has to keep the 7 Noahide laws.
The Noahide laws are being proposed as the standard of morality worldwide, and they will be adjudicated by an impaneled Sanhedrin, a group of 70 Jewish elders who will be adjudicating the world's morality predicated upon the Talmud, the traditions of men as constructed by post-Messianic rabbinical literature. There's a very interesting term that is used, and the term is Mishnah. And what you see in the Talmud is, the Talmud is comprised really of 3 things. You have the Gemara, the Mishnah, and the Torah, or the Tanakh. And what you see with the Mishnah is the Mishnah means the duplicate. It's a double. It's an additional set of laws. And there is this big discussion in the Talmud, and in my opinion, it's an erroneous discussion. But they want to talk about the oral law and about how the oral law was always with them and about how the oral law supersedes, in many cases, the written Torah. And it is then codified as the written oral law. I mean, that should tell you something. It's codified as the written oral law known as the Mishnah, the duplicate. And a lot of this hinges around the idea that there was an oral law given when the judges were appointed under Exodus 18. Moshe's father-in-law said, you can't handle this yourself. You need to appoint, leaders of thousands, leaders of 50s, leaders of 10, to make these adjudications. Now, we have a court system like that in the United States, frankly, and where we have this, this rising rank of appellate courts that hear fewer and fewer cases. And these courts do consider all these things, and then they would set down their decisions, and those decisions would initially, supposedly, they were given orally, and then eventually they would become written decisions. What we have seen, though, however, in the practice of Talmudism is that we don't have the decisions of those priests or those Levites or those fathers of the tribes that were sitting there in over the houses of Yasharon making decisions. Instead, we get replacement theology with a group of rabbis who were sitting around from the 1st century forward, commenting on the Torah or the Tanakh, and those opinions and later opinions, rabbis from the 4th and the 7th and even the 14th century are then, their comments are now considered oral law. They didn't exist at the time that Exodus 18 was written. They didn't even exist, most of them, until after the Mashiach had been crucified. And then these opinions would reflect their rejection of the deity of the Messiah. And this became the Mishnah. Now, arguably, there was a Mishnah in place before the Messiah in the Yerushalmi Talmud. But that Mishnah is scant in its content compared to the Babylonian Talmud, which is vast and controlling. And in many respects, it's very similar to the writings you see in Islam with the Sunnah and the Hadith and and of course, the Quran. They're very similar in content, very similar in idea, and they're very similar in terms of the scope of their control. In the Quran, it's very express. God has no son. It says repeatedly over and over again, although he did have 3 daughters at one point. But even that was denied later on. But God has no son is the repetitive adage of the Quran. But it is also the repetitive adage of the Talmud. It's the repetitive adage of the Talmud as well. And so we see over and over again this idea that there is no son, there is no son, there is no son. And this is why it's quite easy for Islam and Judaism to blend one together. I mean, the two of them lived well together in Spain under the Moors for centuries, 7 centuries roughly. They lived well together, adhering to the same doctrine, God has no son. And so this mission, this duplicate law, if you will, has been constructed. It's a construction of men, the traditions of men, Mashiach talks about it. You nullify the Torah with the traditions of men. And this is what has been going on for a long time. This is what is present in the Talmudic writings. Well, some of that includes these Noahide laws. Now, these Noahide laws are, and you're going to see here, they are a pure invention of the rabbis in the Talmud. Okay? They contradict Scripture, they contradict the Ten Commandments, and they openly contradict what is the true source of what should be spoken about here. And they're done so in order to create worldwide control. That's something for all of us to consider. It's a very dangerous world.